So, Jumping Flash came out last year. Sure did. It did okay. Sure did. But have you seen the N64 Mario game? It looks real good. Sure does. Can you stop that? Sure can. Look, I don't think that robot frog or whatever it was is gonna cut it. Sega came close with that fast blue hedgehog and his attitude. What if we tried something like that? Oh, have you seen what those guys down the hall are cooking up? I don't know if it's good enough to beat Mario, but it's definitely something special. You mean that weird orange guy in that game with all the boxes? That did look like it might be pretty fun. Oh, it's totally a blast, I promise. It would at least give our PlayStation owners a really solid platformer to fill the Mario gap. Then we just continue with the gritty adult games that Nintendo doesn't make anyway, and we'll be golden. What, did I say something dumb again? Well, no actually, that might just work. We already got older players ready to move on from Nintendo, maybe we can get their kids too. Yeah, this'll work for sure. Hello everyone, and welcome to something of a surprise. Don't worry, I'm not about to start yet another ill-conceived series. Seriously, that whole games I already recorded fiasco was just really terrible. No, today's episode is special. See, my best friend in the world is going through a really difficult time right now, and I wanted to make something just for him. You know who you are, man, and I'm not gonna share any specific details here, but just, you know, hang in there. I got your back. I hope you can enjoy this episode, even if just as a momentary distraction. So, when I thought about this friend, I tried to recall some of his favorite games, and, well, I'm not ready to do any episodes on Dark Souls, so instead, I thought of Crash Bandicoot. Which is good, because this game is way shorter, and at least a little bit easier. So, this one's for you, my friend. Let's talk about Crash Bandicoot. Whoa! Curiously enough, Crash Bandicoot and I actually have a history. It's strange because it wasn't until I reached high school and got a job that I really jumped in on PlayStation stuff. The first PlayStation I can remember was at a friend's house, and they had Crash, and I played it and liked it. But even when I got a PlayStation, though it was actually my brother's system, I don't recall if we actually had a Crash game, certainly not the first one. I'm sure I rented it several times, I was always going to Blockbuster. I also bought the PlayStation Classic port on PSP, but I don't know if I ever finished it until the N Sane Trilogy was released in 2017, the version I'm playing today. I can recall that while I was always the Nintendo kid, I managed to consistently have friends that had the other system. So I know that Sonic was the first anti-Mario mascot platformer, but Sega could not find their footing with the Saturn, at least not in the US, thanks to the new popular kid on the block, the PlayStation. Curiously enough, Crash and his zaniness were the perfect fit to fill the void that Sonic left for a few years there, and I know many, my current best friend included, came to love Crash Bandicoot and his PS1 games in the way someone who didn't have Mario could. Look, it's Mario, okay? If you had Mario as a kid, you love Mario, and that's just how it is. Anyhow, as far as the story goes, well, just copy-paste Mario's story over. Okay, to be fair, we do have a few very 90s differences in the story, as our villain is the mad scientist, Neo Cortex, who is mutating animals to build an army to take over the world. He creates his own nemesis in the process, our hero, Crash himself, and likely a couple other bandicoots like his uncomfortably shapely girlfriend, Tawna, and his sister, Coco, who, previously did not exist until Crash 2, but thanks to the almighty power of the remake, she's here too. So yeah, Crash escapes from Cortex, but Tawna gets captured, so Crash is off to rescue her and save the world by crashing into every enemy and box in sight. Get it? He's crashing. Look, games and TV shows for kids usually didn't come with much nuance in the 90s. Also in this case, said nuance is completely unnecessary as Crash was, and still is, pretty cool. Crash managed to stand out with some technical wizardry that made it look way better than any other 3D PS1 game. The obviously better audio on the system lending itself to a perfectly cartoony island sound and its level design. PlayStation games had yet to figure out how to manage the camera in their games, so Crash opted to just have the levels go in a specific direction, and occasionally change what that direction was. Many levels have Crash running forward, away from the camera, but sometimes it would go side to side, like a typical platformer, and occasionally, frustratingly, he runs directly towards the camera. Not all levels are made equal in this case, as the backward levels, and sometimes the forward levels, really struggle to provide accurate perspective to help you land your jumps. They gave Crash a little shadow to help, but it didn't always help much. Even today, on the N Sane Trilogy, I would miss a jump now and again that could have been so much easier. In fact, with the brand new 4th Crash game, they gave him a little circle at all times to show exactly where he'd land, and it makes a massive difference. No exaggeration, that circle is the greatest innovation in the entire franchise. Do these bad camera angles make Crash a bad game? By no means. It does make the game a little harder than it needs to be, which is already plenty hard. Even the most dedicated fans will tell you these games are hard. And despite the amount of Crash I've played since I first put hands on a PlayStation controller, it's still pretty hard, though not nearly like it used to be. I still came pretty close to cussing out the High Road level, but now, with effort, I can beat that level legit without using the ropes. I haven't tried Stormy Ascent yet, which is supposed to be much harder, but that is a bonus level added to the trilogy that's unnecessary to beat the game. Maybe I'll talk about it some other time. I was pleasantly surprised by the level variety, even in this first game. You get the occasional ride a pig levels and run from boulder levels, but even the others come with a shocking amount of change to the scenery. Whether just running through the forest, a native-looking fortress, or the later factory and laboratory levels, it never quite gets dull. What does get a little dull are the bosses. Not the designs, mind you, as we have Papu Papu, Ripperoo, Koala Kong, Pinstripe Potoroo, Embryo, and Cortex, all of whom would be seen again in later games. But the problem here lies in the gameplay. These bosses are reminiscent of decades of Nintendo bosses, that is to say, the designs are awesome, but they aren't very rewarding to beat. It feels like an arbitrary obstacle you just have to push through, and making it worse because this game is old, even in the remake, there are these bizarre hitboxes and unclear attack patterns that caused far too many deaths for me to be okay with. Special attention to Koala Kong, Pinstripe Potoroo, and Embryo for these problems. In short, despite me being so absolutely sure I'm out of the hurt zone, the game killed me anyway. It's not a deal breaker of any sort, but very annoying. Also annoying, if you're a completionist, this game will insist you backtrack and practice certain levels over and over until you do it perfectly. None of the levels here are enjoyable enough to make me happy to revisit them, so when I was done with the game this time around, I briefly considered completion, only to start a level and immediately exit because I just wasn't feeling up for it. Maybe after a break, I'll go back and try to complete it. But even then, this remake also comes with time trials that seem like a massive pain. Of course, the game is pretty short too, so like 3 hours to finish, so maybe you'll think it's worth going back to. But not me. Not yet. The main question when considering a modern remake of an old classic is this worth playing today? Well, sure. If I'm gonna play a Crash game though, I'm probably playing 2 or Warped. And now we have Crash 4, which is such a worthy follow-up, it's like Crash never went away. But the saddest part of it all, Crash technically never went away. There is video after video on YouTube that discusses the history of Crash, but even for someone like this friend of mine, I'm sure he checked out several of those other games throughout the years, and maybe even enjoyed a few. But the N Sane Trilogy brought hope that the developer, specifically Toys for Bob, might be able to find that spark that's been missing from Crash games for so long, that thing that made the original trilogy and the kart racer so special. Not only did they manage it with the trilogy remakes, they did it with Crash 4. Whether we're gonna see more Crash games, well, following the merger, I guess that's up to Microsoft. Back to the question, should you go back and play this remake of the original? Might as well, if you have the N Sane Trilogy. But the series got way better, even just in number 2. So play this one for historical purposes. It's perfectly fine, if just a little obnoxious in its somewhat unfair difficulty.
So there you have it. A well-loved classic, and for good reason. Crash Bandicoot, the first one, is a very solid game that's still very fun to play. Assuming you have a lot of patience, it's definitely worth playing through to the end as the game is not all that long. As I've said a few times, however, it is a really tough time, such that I imagine many Crash Bandicoot fans more or less force themselves to play through this one just so they can move on to the much better Crash 2. So if this game is in your backlog, specifically in the trilogy, definitely keep it around for those other 2 games, but only play the first one for as long as you can stomach it. Don't be embarrassed or ashamed to quit if it just gets too hard. You're not missing out on any grand endings or anything like that. Until next time, happy gaming!